Earlier this morning, you heard me talk about Joe White. And let me just tell you a bit more. At an early age, Joe became dean of the business school at Michigan, considered one of the top 10 business schools in the country. While he was dean, it was nationally known and given an award as being the most innovative business schools in the country. Then he became interim president at Michigan, and served there, Joe, how long? A couple years?
A year.
A year as interim, and then went
I
to.
wanted to serve for 10 years, but I served 1 year, if you know what I mean.
And then went to the University of Illinois as its president. Many would say he was probably the most exciting and effective president in recent history, and did things at the university that had not been done ever before in diversity, well, in many ways, and launched a huge campaign. And if any of you were here, was it last year or the year before, when we interviewed Manny Jackson, were you here, that guy? And do you remember what he said about Joe White? And Manny is one of their major donors, and he wasn't really happy with the university at the time, had a visit with Joe White, and that turned the corner. And he's now one of their major donors. And Joe, I want you to meet 60 of the most effective fundraisers in the country.
Great. Pleasure to meet you.
All right, Joe. Tell me.
Can I say something first?
No.
Okay.
Yes, of course.
No,
Yes.
I just want to say something first. This is human interest. So I came walking in the door of the Westin this morning, and I had a flashback like in a movie. And the flashback was to the days when the Westin was the Continental Plaza Hotel. And the coolest thing in Chicago in those days, decades ago, was to get on the elevator, punch 16, just like I did, to come here, and the doors would open into the consort room. And the consort room was a fabulous dining room here on top of the Westin.
Yes, I do.
I'm sure you do. And in those days, this 16th floor was reasonably high up here in North Michigan Avenue, so it was this great view, still a great view up there. And there are two things I remember. I was with my fiance, who's now been my wife for 43 years, and we were being hosted by her dad, who lived here in Chicago, and we walked from his place up on Lakeshore Drive down to the Westin, came up here, and we were like 19 years old. And so we walk in the consort room, and he's greeted, "Mr. Decker, so nice to have you." And it was the first time I'd ever seen personalized matchbook covers. I thought that was the coolest thing. I was from Kalamazoo, Michigan. We didn't have personalized matchbook covers in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It said Ben Decker on the matchbook. And then we sat down, and the thing the concert room was most famous for were strolling violinists headed by a guy named Franz Bentler, who I just looked up on Google. He died in 2010. But when Franz Bentler came over and stood next to your table and asked, "What would you like us to play for you?" and you were at the consort room with personalized matchbook covers, that was as great as it got, okay? So anyway, it's really nice to be back on the 16th floor, and let's hope it'll be as good in the next hour as it was back then.
Yeah,
So
and we
that's
do
my
have a
story.
violin player for him.
Good.
I'm not sure where he is now, but who knows what. Joe, it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
One of the questions I have is being a leader, leadership, is that innate or can it be learned?
Yeah, so it's both. In my opinion, yeah. I think that to be an effective leader, you have to have an appetite for it. You have to want to be in charge. I've never found that reluctant leaders work out. I want somebody who's eager for the job. would be honored to have the job, is excited by the challenges. And I think some of that is innate, and I think we begin to see it at a pretty young age, like in elementary school and high school, when you just see in a class, certain people will, you can see they feel like, well, if I were in charge, things would be better, right? I think I could organize this better, or, you know, I have this passion for some initiative, and so then they run for class president, or they become captain of the soccer team or whatever. So I think that desire to be in charge I think that's innate. I think most of the rest of leadership actually can be learned and developed. I've watched people go from being not very promising as leaders to being outstanding leaders. And can I give you one quick example?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So I'm going to a board meeting this afternoon. It's a board meeting of Equity Residential, which is the country's largest apartment real estate investment trust. I've been on the board for 20 years. It's really an outstanding company. About 15 years ago, we had a chief financial officer who was a brilliant financial guy. As a trustee, it always gave me a lot of confidence to see him walking around with a sharpened pencil behind his ear. You know, that's the kind of financial person you want. So he was really brilliant, a brilliant financial guy. And I came to a board meeting one day, and the word went out, Dave Nethercutt's just not going to make it here, the guy we're talking about. The guy I'm talking about. He's not, I said, what? He's not going to make it here. He's a brilliant 34-year-old chief financial officer. What are you talking about? And the answer was, well, people can't stand him. Oh, well, that's kind of serious. You know, people can't stand him. So another trustee and I put our heads together and we said, well, we can't let this incredible talent be lost to Equity Residential because we think the guy has a great future. So we spent time with him. We sent him off to the Center for Creative Leadership in North Carolina, where he got one of those very tough 360 evaluations. You know, they meet you on Monday morning and they take you apart. And then they spend the next 4.5 days putting you back together and getting you back on the track. And the following week, when Dave was back at work, I received a package in the mail. And I opened the package, and it's a piece of 2x4 with a bronze plaque in the middle that says, "Thanks, I needed that, Dave Nethercutt." But here's the real punchline of the story. When I go to the board meeting this afternoon, I'll be seeing Dave because he's our CEO. And he's been CEO for 5 years, and he's done a brilliant job. So that's why I say, yes, I think some of it is kind of inborn, that desire to lead, be in charge, initiate, et cetera. But I think a lot of leadership can be developed with time, attention, the right guidance, and open mind, and so on.
What are some of the qualities of being a leader? What are the characteristics?
So I was interested enough in this subject that I wrote a short book about it 5 years ago called The Nature of Leadership, and I'll answer the question in a nutshell.
Give them the subtitle, which is the most unusual subtitle I've ever.
The subtitle is Reptiles, Mammals, and the Challenge of Becoming a Great Leader. If you're interested in why reptiles and mammals, I'll come back to it. But anyway, the answer to your question, from my point of view, my framework is, think of it as a pyramid. At the bottom of the pyramid are what I call the foundation requirements for leadership. This desire to be in charge, integrity, a tremendous amount of energy, because, you know, serious leadership is a marathon race, and you have to be in shape for it. So anyway, there are foundation requirements you have to have. And then on top of that are simply what would have always been called, what for 50 years have been called the hard side and the soft side of leadership. The hard side is analytical, rational, decisive, quantitative, etc. And the right side has to do with people. a good listener, enough empathy so people don't hate you, ability to command respect, good communicator. And so so foundation requirements, hard side, soft side. And what I say is that all that really is just a prelude to the leadership sweepstakes, and that is the ability to make change successfully. Because the agenda for leaders is always ultimately about change. And the reason is that the world keeps changing. Technology changes, environments change, competition sharpens, new opportunities present themselves. And so ultimately, successful leaders are either adapting to change, or they're creating disruptive change, or they're doing both. And so I suppose in a nutshell, my answer is foundation requirements, hard side, soft side, and then the ability to make change. And I think a lot of that can be developed.
Great. I quote you so often because I remember you're saying you talked about the importance of energy, and you said some days you just have to screw yourself up because you don't have it. You look in the mirror and you say, I've got to have it today, because everybody's watching you.
Right.
As president of the university, everybody's watching you.
Right. Yeah, so when I was dean at Michigan, I had a series of senior associate and associate deans with whom I worked, just great people. And we would typically meet at the end of the day, either one-on-one or in a group, and we'd talk about the day. And one thing I began to notice was, there were really days when you felt like being at work, and there were days when you didn't feel like being at work. Let's be honest about that. But it didn't matter whether you felt like it or not, you were at work. And when you're a leader, you're on stage, and I don't just mean in a superficial way, I mean you are on stage. You have to perform in encounter after encounter with individuals and groups and so on, and you are scrutinized. It is true. I always feel kind of sorry for leaders because, so everybody has a bad day, right? Bad hair day, bad energy day, bad this day, bad that day. But when you're a leader, it's a bigger deal than when you're like I am now, Joe Blow, okay? It's a pleasure not to be scrutinized. But when you're a leader, you are scrutinized. And so anyway, my associate deans and I we talked about this, and I said to him, do you remember that great movie about the choreographer Bob Fosse called All That Jazz? So Bob Fosse, anybody remember who played Bob Fosse? It was a brilliant performance. Roy Scheider, right, exactly. Brilliant performance. And Bob Fosse, like a lot of artists, my brother-in-law would say he was ridden hard and put away wet day after day, okay? Anyway, he lived a tough life with, long hours and plenty of drinking and a lot of debauchery and so on. And anyway, in the movie, Roy Scheider gets up every morning. He gets up early, hard worker, gets up 6 a.m., goes in the bathroom, looks in the mirror. He often looks like hell. And but he looks at himself in the mirror and he goes, showtime. And so I said to my associate deans, our motto is going to be every morning, showtime, because that's what leadership requires. The show must go on, and it's got to be good.
Yeah. You mentioned as part of what you bring to the position, you mentioned listening.
Yeah.
Are you a good listener?
Well, say it again. I didn't hear you. Yeah.
And by the way, a lot of people confuse hearing with listening,
Yeah.
and it's different.
I think I am a good listener, to be honest and candid and not very humble on that dimension. I think I am a good listener, and I can attribute why I've become a better listener over the years to one person.
Yeah.
I did an unusual thing early in my career. I achieved tenure at the University of Michigan, and then a year later I gave it up and left and went into industry.
You gave up tenure.
I gave up tenure. at the
That's
university.
un-American.
That's what my faculty colleagues said. It actually was the best thing I ever did. There's a lot that's good about tenure. A terrible thing about tenure is that it locks people in when they're like 30 to 35, and then they won't do other things that would be good for them. But anyway, and the reason I gave it up was I had a really great offer from a great company, Cummins, the diesel engine company in Columbus, Indiana. And I was like 34 or 33, and they invited me to head what at the time was called the personnel function, as vice president of personnel, and I was teaching this stuff. So but I really didn't want to do it because I didn't want to give up tenure. And I went home, and I told my wife about the offer, and she said, "This is my wife, my wonderful wife. Here's exactly what she said, Joe. If they're dumb enough to give you that offer, you should be smart enough to take it." I'll never forget her saying that. You know, I mean, that's a great wife, right? That's a great spouse. Anyway, I went to Cummins, and one of the people I worked for was Henry Schacht, who was the chairman of the board. Henry was Cummins chairman for 25 years. And at the time I went, he was about 50 years old. And I was accustomed to academics who are notoriously distracted. It's very common if you're talking to a faculty member that you only have a little bit of that person's attention because faculty members live in their minds. You know, they're always thinking about their ideas and their research in the upcoming class, so they're notably distracted. So I observed Henry Schacht, the chairman of Cummins, and I saw something I had never seen before, and that was, you may have had to wait a while to get in for a meeting with Henry because he wouldn't rush things. But when you got into a meeting with Henry and he closed the door behind you and you sat across from him, it was like you were the only person in the entire world. He embraced you with his attention and his gaze. And it didn't matter that he just had a brutal meeting with distributors or that union people were unhappy. It didn't matter. It was like all that went away. It was just you and Henry. I was so impressed by that I decided to try to emulate it. And I've never been as good at it as Henry has. But I'm better than I would have been without that encounter. Yeah. But that's the foundation of listening. It's actually paying attention to the other person.
Right. Now you're going to a board meeting.
Yeah.
And Sam Zell makes Forbes list all the time.
Yep.
Billionaire. Is it leadership or business acumen or good fortune or what sets him apart? He didn't start as a billionaire.
Yes, Sam is the chairman of the board of Equity Residential. And on the question of why has he been so successful, I think it really comes down to two things. One, he's extremely smart. It's very important not to underestimate the value of raw intelligence, okay? But the other thing is, like a lot of the most accomplished people, Sam really keeps things simple. I chair the governance committee, so we just did the every year we evaluate each other. Very candid.
You evaluate the directors?
Every trustee evaluates every other trustee, including we all evaluate Sam, and then
You don't.
We do, and I run the process, and I get to give Sam Zell his report card. Right. But anyway, one of the trustees made a very good point, which is that unlike most of us, Sam is never distracted by the clutter. The clutter in modern life is enormous. Right, the 24-hour news cycle, the constant screaming at us from our smartphones and so on. And Sam basically is a big picture guy. And as a business person, he looks at everything through the prism of risk and return. For example, if you're not from Chicago, you probably haven't paid attention, but Sam had a real bad experience with Chicago Tribune. Bought it, then 2008-9 happened, and it fell apart, and he lost $400 million, which wasn't that much for him, but be a lot for most of us. But anyway, and by the way, as a fundraiser, I really was thinking, I sure wish I could have got that 400 million for something else. But anyway, people have, because I know Sam, people have said, does Sam feel just horrible about the Tribune? I said, absolutely not. Well, why not? How can you lose $400 million and not feel bad about it? And I said, because if he could do it all over again, he'd do exactly the same thing. From his point of view, the risk-adjusted prospective return on the deal was attractive. And if there weren't occasional failures, risk wouldn't mean anything. And that's kind of how Sam views things. So A, he's smart, and B, keeps things simple.
Wow. Now, that's interesting. You grade members of the board. What are the criteria? And is it a written grade? You sit down, or how do you grade them?
Well, I guess I'd like to use this opportunity to say that I think boards absolutely should do annual self-evaluations, but not just of the board as a board, but of every board member, peer evaluation.
Wow.
I've seen data that says that about 75% of corporate boards today do annual self-evaluation of the board, but only about 30% evaluate the individual
Wow.
directors.
Did you do that at the university?
We didn't, but if I were still working with the board at the university,
You would?
I would urge them to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, tell us, what do you grade?
Well, we've done it. We've done it as a written exercise, and this year, just to keep things fresh, I did a telephone interview with every trustee, and
You called every trustee?
called every trustee and asked the question: what did you think of the board's performance in 2013? What did you think was strong about it? What did you think was wanting about it? Do you have ideas for improvement in
Did
board
they?
function, structure, function, or process?
Did they?
Oh, they always do. Oh, yeah, they have a lot of it. People carry around so many ideas and insights all the time, and you just need to ask them.
Isn't it a shame that we don't ask?
Right, and people really appreciate being asked.
Yeah.
And then when we're done with talking about the board, then I say, okay, I'm going to name every one of your colleagues, and I want you to give me your performance appraisal of that colleague. What do you think of how he or she is doing? And I don't give them criteria. I had a boss once who said the best performance appraisal form is a blank sheet of paper. And I've always agreed with that. I really don't like this check the boxes, circle 1 to 5, because when you have a blank sheet of paper or a question like you give me, then you have to think carefully about it. So anyway, we do that, and then I compile all the results and I give everybody their feedback. And I will tell you this.
You give it back at a board meeting or individually?
I'll give it this afternoon.
Really?
Yeah, and individually. And here's the thing. Feedback is the key to improvement. We all know this, but you get reminders now. Do any of you folks live in a place where they have those speed limit signs with a radar thing above it that's solar powered?
Yeah.
And then it flashes at you, it says 25 miles an hour, your speed 28. So I've been very interested in those things. And I've actually, there's one on my daughter's street out in Fort Collins, so I stood out there for like 45 minutes one time to watch cars go by. You know what I observed? I observed that there's a tiny number of jerks who, when they see it, speed up. But 98% of the people, when they see a flashing sign, they slow down because they want their speed to match the speed limit. We're just built that way.
Yeah.
So the point is, feedback is essential. It's true for everybody. That's why David Nethercutt ended up as CEO instead of out the door, because he got really tough, candid feedback with guidance what to do about it. And I've watched trustees, these are very accomplished people, and I've watched them change their behavior in response to feedback from their colleagues. You're too dominant.
Now,
For example, and I've watched back off, or speak up more.
yeah. Now, you call them trustees. I've never heard that used corporately.
Yeah, it's just technical difference. Our real estate investment trust is incorporated in Maryland, and under Maryland law, REIT directors are called trustees.
Oh, okay.
Because it's a real estate investment trust.
I love the word trustee, and
It's a great term.
I love it at a university. You hold in trust
Yeah,
the future of the university.
it's a great term. It's a better term than director, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you give feedback,
Yeah.
and you get a response. How long will you take at the board meeting?
Well, we'll spend an hour tomorrow morning on the board's evaluation of the board, but this afternoon I will give every. It'll actually be after dinner tonight. I'll give every director a memo
Yeah.
with his or her feedback and an invitation to discuss it with me.
Now, your board at the university was political. Not true?
Highly true.
Oh, highly true. Okay. And so that would be a little bit different about giving evaluations, I suppose. But you met every time with the foundation board. You never missed, did you?
No.
Yeah. And why was your? It's interesting. Why was your presence important? Because you're the president of the university,
Yeah.
not the foundation. Why were you there?
Well, because the foundation only exists to support the university. That is its mission. It is literally and technically a supporting organization of the University of Illinois. And the foundation board is made up of, I'll call them broadly speaking, 30 or 35 of the university's very best friends. People who care deeply about the university, many of whom have been or intend to be generous with the university and with their time and their treasure. And so more than anything else, they want to hear what's the university's condition, what are the challenges that you're facing, what are the initiatives that you have underway, what's the vision for the future, and how can we help? And really, I don't know if it's the only person, but certainly the best person to deliver that message is the president of the university.
Yeah.
So that's why they want to hear from you.
And did you speak up at the meeting?
Well, they were very nice, they'd carve out an hour of a busy day to hear from the president and then have interaction, yeah.
Yeah. And your presence also sends a signal. It's
bet.
important enough. You guys are important, and I'm there for you.
Yes, I actually think it sends an even more important signal than that, and that is that, and this is just my view, every leader has to decide, but I believed when I was dean that the dean was the school's chief fundraiser, and I believed when I was president of the university that I was the chief fundraiser. Not the only one, it's a team sport, for sure, but I never expected anybody else to do all the hard work of fundraising. I felt like he had to link arms. I mean, Bill, I worked in my career over 20 years with two of the greatest fundraisers who one could ever meet. One is Bill Sturtevant.
He's going to be hard to live with now for the next couple of days.
Harder. Bill is as good a teammate as a president can possibly have, and I can explain why in a minute if you want. And then the other guy who Bill knows was a fellow named Frank Wilhelm at the University of Michigan. And why were these guys great and so important to the institution and to me as president and dean? And the answer is that they, number one and most important, they loved fundraising. They loved fundraising. You have to love it to be good at it. Number two, they were really good at it. I mean, I don't have to tell all you, Bill has figured out all this stuff about moves management and relationships and the importance of the spouse and all this stuff I heard him talking about this morning, and he figured it out and he's lived it and now he's sharing it with other people, and Frank was the same way. And there was a third thing, which is these guys were able to raise money on their own, including 7- and 8-figure gifts. I used to say, Frank Wilhelm's one of the only people I know who could go for 3 weeks to Florida in the winter and visit with old people, mainly old women, in assisted living places and come home with $1 million commitments and leave the donors so happy. But the reason he was able to do it is that he was genuine. Because you know what Frank would do on the weekend after he spent 3 weeks doing that? This is literally true. Frank would go out to the mother house of the nuns who taught him when he was in grade school and high school and visit them and thank them and do something nice for them, because that's just how he was.
Wow.
So the point is, and Bill's exactly the same way. You can't fake it. You can't fake it, 60 hours a week, 50 weeks a year. You can't fake it. Who you really are comes out. And these great fundraisers were, so the point I'm making is they're able to raise money on their own, but then they also know they can raise more money by partnering with somebody like me, who was in, because of the role I was in, president or dean. And so the way these guys would tee up gifts, it would be very common when you work with these great pros that they'd arrange one get acquainted meeting with a big prospective donor, and then they do all kinds of work, and then they invite you back for the big ask. And then you got a yes. And so they knew how to use your time well, because you're ridiculously busy in these general management jobs. So anyway, I just want to say that, and I'm sure there are a lot of people in this room who are exactly like Bill and Frank, but you're indispensable, and the dean or president or whoever the lead person of your organization is really needs that partnership, just like you need it.
Yeah. You mentioned you are the chief fundraiser. The CEO is the chief fundraiser. The dean was the chief fundraiser.
Right.
You mentioned that bringing passion to the job, and these two did. And you mentioned genuineness, integrity, because if you can't believe the messenger, you can't believe the message.
It's all about trust.
Yeah. How did they prepare you for a meeting? They had Mr. and Mrs. X.
Yeah.
They thought there was great potential. They were probably worried that it might not go well and you'd be upset.
Yeah.
Did you get upset if you were on a call that didn't work out quite well?
Bill would know better than I did. I tried to be calm in the job. I reserve my bad behavior for home. No, not really. No, I didn't get upset. So how do you prepare? So there were 3 things. One is I established, when I was dean, I established a weekly meeting of the development people that I chaired. And so every week we would talk about the pipeline of prospective donors and asks and so on. And I did it because, I did it, meaning I had those weekly meetings for 2 reasons. One, because that ensured you keep making forward progress. You wouldn't get bogged down. And the other reason I did it was that then we got to talk about each donor couple, et cetera, in detail. I remember thinking at one time, development's great because it's one of the only places at work in which you can do legitimized gossip, right? I mean, a good development meeting is just full of juicy tidbits and stuff, and it's fine. I mean, it shouldn't only be that, but you get to talk about people because the more you know about them, the better, right?
Joe, excuse me, you did this every week?
Every week. When I was dean, we had a weekly development meeting.
Really?
Well, we were in a campaign. We were trying to really kick up what constituted significant giving. And so, yes, we did it every week. And I also have to say, I inherited this practice from my predecessor, Gil Whitaker, who was also a really good fundraiser. So anyway, number one, we had a weekly meeting. Number two, in preparation, we'd always have a one-on-one with Bill or at Illinois or with Frank at Michigan, and we'd go through the whole thing. Take it from the top. Where are we with this prospect? What are we after? What's the purpose of the gift? What previous giving? Bill would always remind me, because I have a good memory for patterns, but not so good for details. Bill would always remind me, you met with Bill, Bill Caper on thus and such a date. Here's how it went. Remember, he showed you this. He was really proud of it. Details. So then you get kind of back in the moment. And then the third thing, so we'd have a pre-meeting, but then the third thing we would do in that pre-meeting is rehearse. I'm a huge believer in the importance of rehearsal. Like I've sometimes said, my poor wife, I always, the hardest conversations are when you have to tell people they're not doing well, or they're not going to get tenure, or they're being fired or whatever. And I've said my poor wife has been denied tenure and fired so many times because always the night before those meetings, Mayor, I just need to sit with you here for 30 minutes and I need to run through this and get your feedback. And then we do the same thing. We rehearse the ask. I mean, literally, like Bill was the donor and I was the asker. And the reason you have to do that is that you should never, I'm sure you all know this, the first time you do it should never be the real time. The real time should be the second time or the third time. And the other thing is, most of us gag on when we come to the punchline. We gag, right? Well, gagging is fatal when it comes to asking. If these donors, a lot of them, they're very accomplished people. They're used to sitting across the table from people. They're always sizing you up. And if you gag on the punchline, they're like, well, I guess you're not that good. And so, you learn, like from Gil Whitaker, I learned the value of the word consider. I remember I said to Gil one time, because I had never asked for anything. And I said, Gil, how do you ask people for $1 million or 10 million or 100,000 or whatever? He says, well, it's very simple. He said, you don't ask them, would you give? You ask, would you consider giving? And he said, only a Neanderthal wouldn't consider giving, right? So, and he was right. It makes it easy. So anyway, that was the third thing we'd rehearse.
At those rehearsals where you played the asker and Bill played the donor, did he ever say, Mr. President, that isn't quite right? Not quite the way you...
Oh, yeah.
Oh, did
definitely.
he?
Oh, sure. Crafting the ask to get it just right is really valuable.
Do you think of the most difficult ask that you made? Can you think of one that was really difficult, whether you got it or not?
Oh, yeah, sure. So the most difficult ask I made occurred 2 years after I became dean. And the prospective donor was Bill Davidson. Bill Davidson was a graduate of the business school at the University of Michigan. He was the owner of the Detroit Pistons. He was the sole owner of the world's 5th largest glass company. He was a very wealthy guy, very prominent Jewish donor. He's a very sophisticated guy. So we had kind of identified Bill, and he really cared about the school, and he was very philanthropic, so we'd identified Bill as our best candidate for a big gift, because when you're getting started, whether it's in a campaign or when you're new on the job, you need somebody who will do something much bigger than's ever been done before, because then it raises everybody's sights. Like it used to be, say, $10,000 was a big gift. Well, when somebody gives a really big gift, suddenly it kind of lifts the ceiling on everything. So we had targeted Bill as a guy who could maybe do something really significant for us. And so we had in mind a gift of $30 million to create an institute that would focus on emerging market economies. Because we were a business school, we were trying to be more global. collapse of communism had just occurred. So emerging market economies, something like 2 billion people went from command to market economies, in 3 years. So we thought we'd like to be involved. So that was our focus, and $30 million was just, at that time it would have been the largest gift ever to any business school. It shows you how things have changed. One of my senior associate deans became dean at the University of Chicago Business School, and about 6 years ago he got a $300 million gift. Anyway, everything changes in philanthropy. So anyway, I asked Bill if we could have a meeting, and we did all our rehearsal and so on and so forth. So we went to lunch at a Chinese restaurant in a suburban strip mall. Bill was kind of a no-nonsense guy. And his limousine dropped us off, but it was in a strip mall in a kind of a crummy Chinese restaurant. And so we sat in the center, we didn't get a good table. So there we were right in the center. It was really loud, waiters were bustling. And you don't think about that in your, it's like they say when, you have battle plans, but then when war begins, everything goes awry. So here we were in this crowded, noisy restaurant, waiters all over the place. I remember within 1 minute, my nice proposal had Chinese food grease on it, the thing I was going to hand to him. So anyway, all that happened, and I said to Bill, so I made my pitch. And Bill, to my surprise, he takes a piece of paper out of his pocket. But I didn't ask for $30 million. I talked about the purpose. So he said, I'm really excited about that idea. My family came from Eastern Europe, and America's been good to us, blah, blah, blah. And he said, and I'd really like to do that. And I have put together some thoughts for you about a $3 million gift. He preempted me. The guy preempted me with his $3 million offer. That was a very awkward moment. You know why? You sure don't want to come across to the donor as disappointed when he's just, right, $3 million. So kind of on the spot, I decided to pocket a temporary victory. I put it that way. Be very grateful, very appreciative. Tell him I was really excited about his interest, and that the $3 million would surely get us started. I remember using that phrase.
Even then, that was a large gift.
It was a big gift.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was, so that was the end of it. And to fast forward, we did end up getting a $30 million gift, and it was at the time the largest gift ever to any business school. And it obviously took going back to Bill and kind of raising the ante and exciting him and interesting him. But the reason it was my hardest ask was, number one, it was the first time I'd asked for something really big. And number two, it taught me that you have a game plan, but then you have to be, just like a good jazz group, you have to be very good at improvisation, because you never know what's going to be said, et cetera, et cetera.
You were head of personnel at Cummings.
Yeah.
You're an expert on personnel. You know a thing or two about it. Have you made some poor decisions on staff?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah?
Everybody does.
Everybody does?
Everybody does. Appointments are a batting average game, and what you hope for is good batting average. And
Just a good one? Is that the best you can do?
Well, I think you have to be very modest about your prospects for appointments. I mean, remember, great batters in Major League Baseball bat like 350.
Yeah.
So I say to managers, if you look back on your appointments and you bat 650 or 700, that's really pretty good. If 2 out of 3 of your appointments turn out really good, you're doing very well. But the implication of that is that, number one, you will make some selection errors, and number two, my philosophy is you have to deal with them as quickly as possible. I'll put it this way. I've never met a manager who looks back at a problematic appointment and says, gee, I wish I'd stayed with that person longer. They never say that. They always look back once they deal with the problem. You know, they either move the person on or fire the person or whatever. They always look back and say, oh, I wish I'd done that sooner. What was wrong with me?
Right.
They always say that.
You're right.
So, yes, of course, I made some great appointments. I'm extremely proud that two of my senior associate deans are today, I think, the country's best business school deans. Paul Danos at the Tuck School at Dartmouth, Ted Snyder, who went from Chicago, he's now the dean at Yale. You know, you feel really good that you played some tiny role in identifying somebody's talent, challenging and inviting them, and then they get on a path and you look and you go, wow, you know, that person's just great, and I played a little role there. I feel great about that.
Joe, tell us about some of the interviews. You bring in because you hired a development person at Michigan when you were dean. Did you hire someone, or were they there?
Frank was there.
Yeah,
Frank was my predecessor's head of development. But I want to tell you all a quick story, and it pertains both to Bill and to Frank. And I'm very curious how you all feel about this, because you're senior development people. So it was very interesting at both Michigan and Illinois. The person who ran the development organization was different than the person I worked closely with on fundraising.
Oh.
At Illinois, a guy named Sid Misek was president of the University of Illinois Foundation, and Bill and I were the teammates who worked together to raise money. At Michigan, Frank was actually the head of development and the lead fundraiser when I became dean. And after about a year, I noticed something, which was Frank was no good at management. I've already given him accolades. I've told you what an incredible fundraiser he was and what an incredible teammate, but he was a lousy manager. And I also could see that management made him unhappy, whereas fundraising made him happy. But human beings have egos, so this can be sensitive. So at Michigan, I went to Frank, and there was a woman who reported to him, Ellen Barline, and so I went to Frank. I said, Frank, I just have to have a straight-up problem-solving conversation with you. And I told him what I just said to all of you. And I said, I have an idea in mind, but I value you highly, and I really need your buy-in to it if we're going to do it. And I suggested to him that he shed all management duties. Everything, no management duties, and that we make Ellen the director of development. And Frank had a title, something like, I can't remember, like senior director of, I don't know, it was an elevated, dignified title. But he had exactly one report, his assistant, his secretary, that's all. And I have to say, because I've seen ego get in the way of good problem solving, I'll always admire Frank Wilhelm because it was not easy for him. You could see, like in the development community around the university, it's like, well, what's happening to Frank here,
And among his peers.
Yeah, is he getting demoted or something? But we did it, and the bottom line was Ellen did a great job running development, and Frank did a phenomenal job raising money, and that's all that counts, right? It's just results that count. And I've always admired Bill. I think a lot of people would have expected that Sid Misek would have been my partner. But I could see that Sid liked heading the foundation, and I could see that Bill was just the total pro. So Bill's the guy I wanted, to be my partner.
That would take a lot of ego on Sid's part to be able to handle that.
Yeah, and I don't know, Bill could talk to this. I suspect it wasn't that easy for Sid at first, because people are just people, we're a little fragile, all of us, about certain things. But the bottom line is we pulled it off, and I think Sid did his job really well, and I know Bill did his job really well. And, you know, we had what was it, a $2.1 billion, $2.3 billion campaign, and the bottom line is we succeeded, and that's all. It's just results that count. So that's my thought.
Yeah, great. Tell us about a mistake that you made. You did an interview.
Which one?
Well, your batting average, you said, was about 650. So you interviewed somebody. They seemed perfect for the job.
I can't tell you about a different mistake, but it's a development mistake.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to tell you this story because I think there's an important takeaway for all of us who raise money. This is true confessions, as you'll see. We had an alum of the University of Michigan named Steve Ross, a real estate development guy in New York City. And Steve got into, like everybody in real estate in the early 1990s, Steve got into financial difficulties. They were all overextended. The real estate recession in the early 90s was absolutely horrible. And Steve had made a big commitment to the school, and then he stopped making his payments. And on top of that, while he wasn't making his payments, he was constantly on me about the person we'd appointed to hold the chair that he had endowed.
Oh, he didn't like the person.
He didn't like the person. So here I had a donor who'd made a commitment, ran into trouble, was not fulfilling it, and he wanted me to deal with this tenured professor who he didn't think very highly of. So I'm human too, and my patience ran thin. It really did. And I never said anything inappropriate, but my wife will say I don't hide my feelings very well. And so Steve and I, it was kind of a low-key rupture. Can I put it that way? I think we chose not to like each other very much. Didn't interact very much. So, you know, time went on. It didn't ruin the campaign. We raised money from a lot of other people, et cetera, et cetera. Fast forward. I was dean for 11 years. I retired, left the job. My successor comes in. One of the great things about turnover is that it's a reset. Everybody gets a fresh start. By this time, Steve Ross, like most real estate developers, had recovered. He had built that fabulous AOL Time Warner Center on Columbus Circle in New York City on 59th Street. You know, really pretty fabulous.
Yeah.
It was a big success. So my successor as dean very smartly went back to Steve Ross, rekindled the relationship. That led to a $100 million gift from Steve that completely rebuilt the business school at the University of Michigan, so it has a beautiful new facility with a wonderful winter garden and all that. And then Steve gave another $100 million to the university, just like in the last 3 years, of which 50 went to the business school. So it's a story with a happy ending, but you asked about a failure. I was wrong there. I was wrong. I mean, my impatience, our chemistry wasn't good, and I indulged myself by breaking off with the donor instead of hanging in there with him when he was going through a hard time. And what I realized in retrospect was he was going through a really hard time where everything he had built up was at risk, and he needed somebody who would hang in there with him. It didn't mean we would end up being best friends, but it was a mistake I made. And I felt really great that my successor resuscitated the situation, because sometimes when that happens, some other institution is nice and kind and appreciative to the person, and you lose the person completely. Fortunately, Steve's commitment to Michigan was so high that we didn't. That's a mistake I made.
So you hang on.
I think you have to hang in there with people. It won't always work out well, but it's so important to remember philanthropy, people don't have to do it. They're not obliged to give $1, not $1, not 1 minute of their time, nothing. It's all voluntary. So I realize now, and I think I've been better about it. Bill, you and I hung in there. Think of that difficult guy we talked about this morning, right? Not difficult, interesting. Yeah, difficult. I mean, we've hung in there, and maybe it'll pay off. Maybe it won't.
Yeah. You made a distinction between a manager and a fundraiser.
Yeah.
What would be the qualities of a good manager, do you feel?
Well, if I can only say one thing, it is that a good manager makes the trains run on time. It's very easy, with so much emphasis on leadership, new initiatives, innovation, and everything. It's very important to remember the foundation of organizations, the foundation is management, order, control, predictability, keeping commitments, doing budgets, living within budget, honest performance appraisals, getting rid of the people who aren't cutting it. I mean, this is management. This is what Ellen Bauerlein did for the development office. And Frank had no appetite for that stuff. And I think now, honestly, he'd be the first to say it. He didn't like any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Make the trains run on time. No typos in the materials, etc.
Were you a leader or a manager, do you feel?
Well, I felt in the jobs I was in, I had to do both. I had to make the trains run on time, but needed to embrace change and do my best to make change. And I've had a real career, meaning it's an imperfect career. I've had some real successes that I feel great about, and I tried some things that failed.
Like what?
As Bill can tell you, the number one thing I tried at the University of Illinois was to put us in the forefront of the burgeoning movement toward quality online education, and the faculty had a fit.
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They just wouldn't do it. So, but I tell leaders when I'm kind of I guess an old statesman now or something, and so young people come and talk to me and seek advice, and I say to them, look, if you haven't tried some things and failed, then you're just being way too conservative. I mean, when I interview people and I say, well, tell me about your track record, and all they can tell me is about all the great stuff they did. And then if I say, well, tell me about something you tried and failed at, and they say, well, I can't really think of anything, I lose interest. It's just not enough. They're just not reaching high enough,
Yeah.
right? What do you think?
Oh, I agree. Yeah, sure.
We all have failures. We were talking about, I'm getting ready a couple of years to retire from the Equity Residential Board, and so we're talking about new trustee recruiting.
Why are you retiring?
Because I don't think people should serve forever.
Really?
fundamentally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's called board renewal now. I chair the governance committee. I think I need to lead by example, and so I've set a retirement date. And I think you always have to be building for the future. Always.
I want to
building
get
for the
back to
future.
that. You were starting, and I interrupted you. You were starting to
Oh,
say that.
anyway, we're talking about new trustee recruiting, and one of the trustees said, we need to make sure to recruit somebody who has lost money in real estate. Now, that's a funny way to put it, right? That doesn't mean they haven't made money in real estate, but the truth is, if you have a career in real estate, you're going to have lost some money if you're entrepreneurial at all, because you're going to have started something, you're going to borrow money. The real estate cycles, you're going to have hit '08 or '91 or one of these down periods, and you're going to have lost money in real estate. And you learn at least as much from your failures and your hard times as you do from your successes.
Joe,
Yes, sir.
you're CEO of an organization, and John has been on the board for 23 years.
Yeah.
He gives $300,000 a year, and in the capital campaign, he gave the largest gift.
Yeah.
Now, he's been on the board for 23 years. What are you going to do? Is that a person who needs renewal, where you need renewal, or do you keep him on?
Well, I want to be realistic in answering this. I think that if you have a practice of board renewal so that it is normal for people to come on the board, serve a period of time, contribute a lot, whether it's money or time or talent or whatever, and then move off, then I think you're probably on pretty solid ground in going even to a major donor and saying, the time is coming. But the problem, though, is that most volunteer boards don't have that arrangement. And as a result, you end up with this real awkwardness where you have a trustee or a director, you have directors or trustees who really ought to move off because they're just stale and because you need the seat to bring in some fresh talent. But it's just incredibly awkward to go to them because it's like you're singling them out for special bad treatment. And the last person you're going to single out for special bad treatment is the person who made the largest gift in the last campaign. So I think my answer is that boards should renew board renewal as an ongoing practice and flesh it out with some policies and then act on them. And if you do that, then I think you're on solid ground. If you're not, believe me, that person will be on the board as long as he or she wants.
Tough. So you wrote a book on boards. Why did you write a book about boards? And is this mostly corporate boards, or would this apply also to the nonprofit?
So I mentioned that about 5 years ago, in order to clarify my own thinking about leadership, I wrote this book on leadership called The Nature of Leadership. I have just completed a book that will be published in August called Boards That Excel. I think the subtitle is Candid Insights and Practical Advice for Directors. And it is really aimed at both for-profit and nonprofit boards because I think there's about an 80% overlap in good practices and what makes for excellent boards between the two. In the book, I address the difference between for-profit and nonprofit boards, but again, I think there's about an 80% overlap. And the reason I wrote the book is that, well, first of all, I should say, and Jerry's the expert, look at all his books back there. Fundamentally, I write books to challenge myself.
I missed what you said about the books back there.
All your books, yeah. I said you're the expert. But I fundamentally write books to challenge myself and to clarify my thinking. There was Scotty Reston was a great editor of the New York Times. And he said, he had a phrase that I've always loved. And the phrase was, how do I know what I think until I read what I write? I would say that more than anything else, that's why I write books, because I've served on great boards. I've been involved with not such great boards. And I decided a couple years ago, buddy, you ought to have something to say about this. And if you don't, what's wrong with you? So that's why I wrote the book. And the other reason I wrote the book is to pay it forward. In the introduction of the book, I say its primary purpose is to pay it forward because there were a handful of people who enabled me to become a director or trustee, gave me guidance, really helped me go from being a novice to a pretty experienced board member, and I'm grateful to them. And you can't pay it back to them. How do you pay back Sam Zell or other people? But you can pay it forward by sharing what you've learned with others so that they can become effective also. So that's the reason I wrote the book.
What would be the 2 or 3 major points you would make for the nonprofit board?
Well, the first and most important is the same for for-profit and nonprofit boards, and that is high performance begins with high aspirations. One of the board's most important jobs is to set high aspirations for the organization it oversees and for itself. Very few organizations or individuals accomplish more than they aspire to. Most of us accomplish a little bit less. But high aspirations are the foundation of high performance. So, for example, in this book, my jumping off point, I have 2 jumping off points, 2 corporate boards, one Equity Residential that I've mentioned, and the other company, a great company, private company called Gordon Food Service in Grand Rapids, Michigan. In both cases, and I've been involved with both for over 20 years, in both cases, their leaders, as we were creating governance arrangements, set incredibly high aspirations. Sam Zell said to me, we are going to be a prodigious user of capital because we're going to build the nation's best multifamily real estate investment trust. And so the board's job is to ensure that our credibility with the capital markets is sky high. Now that was a really high aspiration because the real estate investment trust industry 20 years ago was littered with bad reputations, way too many related conflicts of interest. There was always this sense that the real estate professionals were screwing the other investors, pardon my French. So basically Sam said, look, we're getting a fresh start here. It's a brand new company. And because we're going to be prodigious users of capital, our credibility has to be sky high. He turned out to be right. EQR started with an enterprise value of $800 million. Today, the enterprise value is $34 billion. The $34 billion was built by tapping the capital markets, stock and bond markets, having investors place their trust in us and then using their funds wisely. At Gordon Food Service, Paul Gordon, who's passed away now, said to me in my office in Ann Arbor, I'd like your help creating a board for our little private family-owned company. And the goal is to have governance arrangements that will enable us to thrive in perpetuity. I'll never forget that phrase, thrive in perpetuity. I thought that was a really great aspiration for a company to thrive in perpetuity. And so that's what we went about doing. 25 years later, it's gone well. The company's the 34th largest private company in America now.
I know them well and have called on them often, and the Sun.
They're really great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and very philanthropic, very devoted to their Christian mission interests and so on.
Yeah.
So anyway, the answer is, starts with high aspirations. Then you have to achieve great results. It's always about results, not about intentions. It's about results, right?
How do results start? Is it leadership at the top? Is that, or getting the market at the right place, or?
I'll tell you the concept that I've found useful. Everybody has their own, but the concept I like most is what I call the virtuous upward spiral. The question leaders always face is, how do we create a virtuous upward spiral of performance, whatever our starting point? So I'll give you an example. I sort of figured this out when I was dean at Michigan. We were one of those top 25 business schools, always trying to be in the top 10, but rarely getting there. And so I figured I'd have 10 years as dean to get us there. The question was how to do it. And you can start anywhere. Any positive development can be the beginning of a virtuous upward spiral. And so just to use that example, I decided that the starting point I'd like to create was this gift from Bill Davidson that I mentioned. I thought that if within 2 years of becoming dean, we could announce a $30 million gift, the largest to any business school, public or private, it would like electrify the place, energize the place, okay? And it turned out it was. That happened. Because our whole community used to think, well, the really top business schools are Stanford, Harvard, Wharton, Northwestern, and we're a good public university business school, but those are the really good ones. And suddenly, we were able to deliver to the community the largest gift ever to any business school, public or private, and it changed the whole conversation. Once we did that, then we decided we need to get some external reinforcement. And at the time, the big prevailing ranking thing was always US News. But we figured out we were never going to excel in US News because of their methodology. But fortunately, Business Week began to rate and rank business schools. And it was all based on student and employer satisfaction. And we said, aha, here's a race we can win. So we started with the gift. And then the next thing you knew, because we really worked at it, we got ranked like number 3 or number 2 in Business Week. So now we had the biggest gift ever, and now we were in the ranked here. And then the next thing we said was, well, you know, innovation is hard, but it's free, right? Innovation, if you can be really a great innovator, it doesn't cost a lot of money, it just takes a lot of will and imagination. So then we set out, I'll spare you the details, to create a big change in the way we educated students, got them out of the classroom, got them into teams, got them into companies and other organizations. The employers loved it. And so then we were named most innovative. So now you see gift, recognition through ranking, highly innovative, energize the community and get recognition for it. On top of that, you build more gifts, and then you get this upward spiral. So fundamentally, my view about leadership is you're always either in a damaging downward spiral that you have to arrest and turn around, or you're in a virtuous upward spiral that you have to maintain and accelerate. That's how I think about it. Great. And you can start anywhere.
Great. Would you suggest that these people go back and talk to their staff and to the board about high aspirations, to dream? Is this where it starts?
You know, you and I are sitting here having a conversation. I'm looking at all these people who are being so nice to be attentive and listen. I have no idea. One of the things I always worry about is I have no idea what people have really heard, if anything. And I would not dream of giving them advice about what they should go back and do. All I can do is.
What do you suggest?
Well, it depends. It depends on your situation. I mean, you know, it's totally dependent on your situation. My hope is that maybe we've covered some things that you can insert into your situation and then act on. So if, for example, your feeling is, you know, we really haven't set high aspirations that are exciting our community and our donor, then definitely I'd go back and talk with the people you work with about let's raise the aspiration level. But maybe your issue is something completely different. You know, maybe the issue is that you have a board that isn't made up of the right people, that's kind of stale, et cetera, in which case then I'd hope maybe you've heard something here about board renewal. So it really, really depends on your situation. Maybe you have somebody on your team who isn't really very good, and you heard me say, the sooner you move those people on, the better. Because all managers who take that action look back and say, I wish I'd done it sooner, not waited so long. So I don't know, it totally depends on what your situation is. But I have this hope, and that is, when I think back about the last 25 years of work that I've done, fundraising was my favorite part. Okay, I
It
did-
was?
Fundraising was my very
Really?
favorite part of what I did. You do a lot of different things as a dean and president, so many different things, big general management jobs. And when I became dean, the one thing I had not done at all before was raise money. And it was my biggest worry. I thought, what if I'm not good at this? And what if I don't like it? But looking back 25 years later, I can say it was my favorite thing to do. Why was it my favorite thing to do? Number one, because let me put numbers on it. When I became dean at Michigan, we had a $30 million endowment. Today, the University of Michigan Business School has a $400 million endowment. You know why? Because all through the bull market of the 1990s, we raised money and threw it into the endowment. And the endowment, so we raised a lot of money and then it compounded because of the great bull market. And so now my successors have the resources they need to be really great. Students have scholarships. When I became dean, we had 9 endowed chairs. When I was done, we had 39 endowed chairs. I feel great about that.
Sure.
Because, so number one, I loved it because if you believe in your institution, then raising money for it it's like bringing home the bacon to the family. That's your job. So that was one reason I loved it. The second reason I loved it is that a lot of stuff you do in management, senior management, it's not very measurable. You never really know how you're doing. It's ephemeral. You have a million meetings and it's like, do we make forward progress or not? That's not true of fundraising. Fundraising is all about thermometers and needles and goals and achievement, and I love that. I can look back and say, we $2.3 billion campaign, got it done. And the third reason I loved it was I worked with great people like Bill, Frank, and I met unbelievably wonderful people. The biggest thrill of fundraising, you all know this, is you just meet unbelievable people. They're not, I like people generally, but the people who are philanthropic are not the normal distribution of human beings. They're on the high end of the distribution, right? Because they're accomplished, they're thoughtful, and they're generous. Well, who wouldn't want to spend time with people like that? And so, it's kind of strange now to have all that work in the rearview mirror, but the big residual for me is the Manny Jacksons of the world, just great friends who will be friends forever. And there are a whole bunch of them. So my hope for everybody here, I don't know what you're going to take away. My hope is that you love what you're doing, you really believe in it, and that you really enjoy it.
Wow. This will be a morning we will all remember. Here's how I'd like to leave the morning with Joe White. First of all, how many would like to have a boss like Joe White? I want to
Good, I'm available. No, I'm not. I'm not really.
I'd like to open it with questions.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And then when it's all over, take maybe 5 minutes to cap it all, Joe.
Sure.
Yeah. What kind of questions do you have for Joe White?
You've been sitting a long time, guys. It won't be much longer, I promise.
Yeah, Guy.
I love the raising aspirations, expectations, and a friend of mine, I don't know if the quote's original with him, but the first time he shared it with me, in my mind, it took a while to get my arms around it, but he said the distance from 1 to 2 is greater than the distance from 2 to any other number.
Yeah, right. Spinning it up, that's the hard part.
Remember that early on in a relationship with a donor, the more you can help them aspire,
That's right.
the easier it's going to be the rest of the relationship.
Guy, let me put you on the spot for a minute. You're going to go back home. How will you use this? You are the CEO of a major organization.
What is your organization?
Christian Appalachian Project.
And they do great things.
I believe it.
We've done a lot outside of the fundraising, what the major gift area,
Yeah.
to help build, I call it management and leadership capacity,
Yeah.
for people to have the tools and be able to take their pieces of the organization higher and higher and do better and better. In major gifts, it's been a matter of getting the right people. And now we have that team. And my team does think big. And I spend more time with my major gifts folks than I do with my two VPs because they're seasoned pros.
Right.
These folks are pros, but we all think similarly. And I think just reinforcing the high aspirations.
Yeah.
Being bold with donors and sharing that bold vision with them.
Good. Okay. What other questions? What questions do you have? Yeah.
Joe, what would your advice be if, hypothetically speaking, if you are working under the direction of a friend?
I'm sorry. Under the
Yeah.
direction of
I mean,
what?
somebody who's not a very good manager, but they're
Oh.
good in other ways. Well, it's really tough when you're in that role. It was easy for me because I was the boss. It's really tough when you're in that role. At the extreme, I have to say this. I have to say this. Life's too short to work for bad bosses. Okay, so I'm at the extreme. I would just say to you that, you know, if the organization's dysfunctional, if the trains never run on time, if it really frustrates you, if you lose sleep at night, if you're crabby to your family, life's too short. Get to move on, do something else. Within that situation, I would say that all you can do as a member of the team is your part to make things run as well as possible. That's all you can do. You're not in a position to change out the boss or to change the boss or anything else. All you can do is make things work as effectively as possible. If you have a good relationship with that person, I think you can problem solve together. Just for example, because I know that the situations I described were a little bit unusual because I have this strong view that the best fundraisers are great individual contributors, and leadership and management is like a different skill set. So, you know, and so I was able to act on that, but it doesn't usually work that way. Usually those roles are combined in one person. Often, if you have a leader or manager who really isn't that good at that job, if that person can get a number two person, a chief operating officer, well, you know, be one way to describe it in a big organization, or even an executive assistant who just helps with, because often these people are not very well organized and all that kind of stuff. You know, if you're close to that person, maybe you can talk it through. But I don't have a great answer. Your options are limited.
It ought to be fun, shouldn't it? You ought to feel.
It's got to be fun. Got to have enough fun at work. It's where we spend most of our time.
Yeah. What other questions? Yeah.
You talked about using the CEO's time well.
Yes.
So as a president,
The question is using the
Using the CEO's time well, right?
So as the president of a university, how did you want your time used? How did you want them to, how much time did you spend on fundraising? And when did you want to be brought into the process from the beginning, all through, beginning and end? What did you want them to do?
We actually talked about that going in. I think I said going in, because we were headed into a campaign, I think I said that I need to devote about 20 to 30% of my time to fundraising. Does that ring any bells with you, Bill? I don't want to tell a lie here.
It does. I think we settle around 25 to 30.
Yeah, about 25 to 30%. So it really begins with the president or the dean, the executive director, whoever it is, committing that this is such an important part of my job that I'm going to devote this amount of time to it. And that then lets the development people figure out how to use that time best. How much of it is internal meetings, how much of it is get acquainted meetings, how much of it is asks, how much is stewardship, et cetera.
Not every CEO is willing to give 25%. That is part of the problem, right? Okay, what other questions? Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
so earlier Jerry told some of us, he gave us an envelope.
Earlier, Jerry gave us an envelope and said to write down, each of us had different instructions. So this is my second time with Jerry. So my instruction was, if I think that I have 30 days left, I told I have 30 days left to live, who do I want to talk to? So have you ever had a chance to tell Steve Ross what you told us today?
Oh, that's a great question.
It's a great question. I'll tell you what I did, just a candid answer. I wrote Steve a letter after my successor landed this $100 million gift. And, you know, I didn't go on a great length, but I thanked him. I told him I was sorry that our relationship hadn't been what it should have been and could have been, and that I was deeply grateful for his continued commitment and generosity to the University of Michigan. And I never heard anything. So that's just how it is.
Yeah. Joe, send us off with a few minutes.
Well, I guess I'll just end with one thing. I asked Jerry before we started this morning for a list of your, for the participant list, so I could look through and see who you are and see what the organizations are that you represent. And I was reminded of something, this is what I want to end on, and that is that the nonprofit world in America is unlike anything the world has ever seen. It is completely unique, completely unique. There has never been generosity, philanthropy, like we've experienced in America. And the result of it is this profusion of organizations with so many purposes and causes, which can pretty much all be put under the same heading, which is to make a better world. And when I read the list, I loved it. You know, I saw the Heifer organization. Who's the person who? Yeah, I saw the Heifer organization, and you know, I'm from Central Illinois. It's farm country. I thought, gee, I wonder if it means heifer like a little cow. And it does. And then she had a great elevator speech. She told me in 1 minute about the livestock and the poor and the et cetera. I don't have that speech down yet, sorry. But anyway, I looked at that. I saw there's a youth organization with a number of different, it's like American Youth or something. Young, right, I saw that. I can only imagine how important and great that is. Last night I was watching, what's that cooking show where they get canned, you know, they get Chopped. I was watching Chopped last night, and they had 3 celebrity chefs who were on raising money for causes important to them. You know, kids in inner city LA and all that. So anyway, I'm very inspired by the nonprofit sector, even though I'm a former business school dean, I'm a corporate director, you know, I'm deeply planted in the business world, and I'm a big believer in the wealth generating role of the private sector in America. I think it's crucial, and I think it is where the wealth comes from, but I'm also inspired by the nonprofit world and the incredible good that it does. We're in an era right now in which we're kind of busy maligning the 1%, you know, for their, I guess, alleged misdeeds. But of course, when you've made your living like I've made my living, approaching people in the 1% to ask them to part with their resources, and you see the generosity, yeah, it gives you a little different angle on the whole thing. So I guess, and one other thing, I mentioned this company, Gordon Food Service, I've been involved with for 25 years. It's very interesting. This is a really big company now, 34th largest private company in America. It's been set up to run in perpetuity, as I mentioned. The profits of the company go to 3 things, none of which is the family living splendidly. It's a very modest family in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Profits of the company go to 3 things. Number 1, reinvestment in the business, so it can compete successfully forever. Number two, profit sharing for employees. The company's profit sharing plan just went over $1 billion for the first time, so that we have people who've driven trucks for 30 years and they retire with, you know, a big six-figure retirement and a comfortable retirement. And the third thing the profits go to through the family are the Christian missions in which the Gordon family believes so deeply. And it's just a wonderful example of wealth creation through the private sector and then making a better world through the nonprofit side of what the family does. And you know, they're not the only family who does this. So the point I want to end on is I think we're very privileged to be participants in this vibrant, thriving, diverse, nonprofit world with all of the different missions and all the different organizations and so on. And I guess I want to end by just telling you that because, look, fundraising work, like all work, can be discouraging at times, right? The goals seem too hard. You go through a dry spell where, you know, you make asks and they don't come through. One of the toughest things these days is what I call making the cut. Everybody out there who's giving money every year is lopping off, you know. I'll keep giving to them, they're not getting any anymore. So sometimes you don't make the cut and that feels really bad. So anyway, at those times I think it's always good to remember the purpose, you know, the overarching purpose of what we do, how valuable it is, how important it is, how if we only had government and only had the private sector, we couldn't have the sort of hope that I think we're entitled to about building a better world that the nonprofit world does. I'll end up with one tip. This is a tip that could raise a lot of money for your organizations. I know a lot of wealthy people now who are structuring their estates so that their children will get the, you know, whatever they call that, the maximum exemption. What is it, 5 million now? 5 million now. And some of them are buying a second to die, a survivorship life insurance policy. So anyway, they're going to, no matter what their wealth, they're going to take care of the kids by giving them the maximum exemption and maybe a second to die life insurance policy. And everything else is going to go to charity. And the reason, I'll be blunt about this, the reason is they don't want the money to go to the government. Because, you know, a lot of these wealthy people are libertarians and, you know, they're just not very confident about how the government's going to use their money. I think that there's kind of an unprecedented opportunity right now for bequest gifts, because I think there's a balloon expanding every day of bequest money which is not yet designated. Because the first decision they make is the money's going to the kids and to charity, not to the government. The second level decision is, in the charities, who's going to get what? And sometimes they leave it up to the kids to decide. So anyway, I just noted this in talking with wealthy people. I think the future of bequests is going to be absolutely enormous, and it's probably important to be in there pitching. Good enough? Thank you. Thanks, everybody. I wish you the best.